Hello everyone, PK Shy Guy here, and I guess there's one good thing to come out of the and it's the fact that I just decide not to be dead. So, video games are pretty good. I kind of base my channel around them, and I know I'm comically late on this extremely overdone topic, but I'm going to count down my 10 favorites of the last decade. And by last decade, I mean any game that was released from 2010 to 2019. The rules are pretty simple. I must have played the game, it's obviously my opinion, and I will be excluding remakes, new ports, all of that. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. Number 10 is Borderlands 2. Now, for the most part of last decade, I wasn't really that interested in first-person shooter games. I would still play them, but not enough to where I'd buy the consoles and systems they were on. Borderlands 2 was kind of an exception, as it took place in a more fantasy-esque world, which I preferred and still prefer to an extent. And I've had my fair share of experiences with the co-op multiplayer with friends and whatnot, but whenever I got my good PC, I explored this game's single-player content extensively, and I like it quite a lot. The game hosts an insane variety of weapons, many of which do not even, function like weapons should, but that's kind of what makes it awesome. It goes with the whole fantasy and ridiculous setting, and it just adds to both the charm and replayability, and the fact that you can just scavenge any gun out of a bin and basically use that in your entire playthrough, which makes each playthrough completely different. And just to add on top of that, there are 6 unique Vault Hunters, each with their own skill trees, each with their own builds, so basically this is a game you can replay several times over and not get bored. The only major issue I have with this game is the fact that its post-game meta can kind of boil down to the samey slag spam builds and weapons, and the fact that it becomes a little more of a grind than it does actually being skill-based, but that's just a small portion of the game, and I still love it. Number 9 is Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a game that within my first playthrough, I simultaneously realized that the game is outdated and clunky in some regards, yet it's also one of the most satisfying and captivating games I've played, as I jumped in the deep end of this series after finishing it. But Dark Souls combat is relatively simple to what some fans might get you to believe. The high damage done by the enemies combined with the plethora of traps demands a lot of attention on the player's part, and that makes this game completely fair but also being brutally difficult on a first playthrough. I think probably the biggest satisfaction of Dark Souls is replaying the game over and over again, both being able to experience with different builds, but also to master scenarios that destroyed you on your first playthrough. Even though Dark Souls has kind of gained a reputation of being the hardest thing known to man, it's also important to note that this game has some pretty interesting lore, an interconnected world reminiscent to Metroidvania titles, and some truly phenomenal boss fights. Number 8 is Super Mario Odyssey. Now, I remember the day this game's trailer released when I got home from school and basically ascended as I saw this beautiful 3D Mario game being released. Eventually, months later, the game dropped, and I thought it was the best thing of all time. Even though its placement on the list isn't as high as it would have initially been, I still absolutely adore this game. Admittedly, this game is a bit easier than I would have liked, which is fine, but I kind of prefer what they went for challenge-wise in the Galaxy games. And if you look, there are quite a few moons that are more filler-ish, but even then, I like this game just because of how much of a breath of fresh air it was. It wasn't just like get to the end of the flagpole, it was just these big awesome worlds that you can explore to your heart's content, so many new enemies and characters, and it's just fun to play. Literally, you can walk from one end to another of one of these maps, and I would find a way to have a blast. All the combos you can pull off, the ways you can maneuver around worlds with all the different captures, it's a grand old time, and I probably got more time out of it than most people would have, which I think says a lot. Number 7 is Pikmin 3. Continuing with the trend of games I was hyped for upon release, Pikmin 3 is the reason I got a Wii U. Even though Pikmin 3 isn't a perfect game, like no game really is, it far from disappointed me. Aside from some mediocre grass textures, the game still looks stunning today. The worlds just feel more organic with the fact that they have a lot more height and depth to them. And even though they are more linear, the fact that you can multitask with some of the new UI, including the Go Here function, makes this game a blast to replay and just to see how much you can handle at one time. On top of that, the combat has become much more fluid, with bosses that fully take advantage of this, and are overall just some of the most unique in the series. Even the game's shorter story mode is made up for by its addicting side modes, Mission Mode and Bingo Battle. I swear, if they released Bingo Battle on a Switch port with online, I resign from life. Number 6 is Fire Emblem Three Houses. I had moderate hype for this game before its release, and I was absolutely blown away at how much I loved it. I've only played like 6 Fire Emblem games plus Heroes, but it didn't take long for this one to easily become my favorite. This game is like the best of both worlds. It takes the darker storylines of some of the older titles, along with some pretty good map design, and brings in a lot of the new enhancements, such as speeding up battle animations in the newer games that make the game far less of a chore to play. What makes this game seem like an evolution of the formula is the amount of new stuff that it adds. There are 4 separate story routes that you can play through, and while this isn't for everybody, I personally really enjoyed the school sections. The fact that you can participate in activities with your students to help their motivations and stat growths really helped me grow connected to this cast of characters, which I consider to be one of the best in any game I've played. Top that off with a godly soundtrack, and you've got something special. Number 5 is Halo Reach. As you've noticed with some of the other games on this list, I find them to be the peak of their series, and Halo Reach is definitely no exception. I'm not avid in Halo's competitive scene or online multiplayer, so I can't really compare the nuances of Reach compared to other games, but I can say that with the multiplayer I've experienced during its re-release in the Master Chief Collection, I've had quite a bit of fun. But that's not really the main reason the game's here. The big things that stood out to me were the Forge and the single player. Sadly, Forge wasn't included in the MCC, but I still have plenty of memories of playing this mode in this game's initial release with my friends. Halo Sandbox has always been fun to mess around with, but just throw a bunch of 5th graders on an island and give them all the tools to work with, and it's a blast. Simple as that. The single-player campaign, on the other hand, has some of the most fun and varied missions out of any linear FPS I've played, and the overarching theme of dread as Noble Team defends their homeworld from impossible odds is executed in a way unlike anything else I've seen in fiction. Bungie's Halo games were masterpieces, and if you ask me, this was the perfect send-off. Number 4 is Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Being somebody who hasn't played the first game, even though I definitely plan to get it once the remake drops, this was probably my biggest surprise of last decade. I enjoyed my initial playthrough quite a lot despite noticing some weaker areas, but it's mostly when I came back to revisit this game, both in New Game Plus and with its optional content, that the game really shined. The combat starts off pretty bare bones, yet once you get into the meat of it, you can pull off so many interesting combos and effects that it's just enjoyable. I really never got tired of it. Even grinding all the affinity charts for the rare blades never got tiresome for me, as they all had unique personalities and fun side quests. Xenoblade 2 also has fantastic use of open world, with the fact that its areas are very expansive and natural, yet they also feel deliberate in the content they offer. And par for the course for any great RPG is a wonderful cast of characters and an intriguing story. This game also has some bomb-ass waifus, just saying, 10 out of 10, perfect video game. Number 3 is Dark Souls 3. Take everything I said about the first Dark Souls with its rewarding combat and satisfying difficulty and just polish it to perfection. Some may point out Dark Souls 3's obvious fan service and leaning on older games and its lore, but that never really bothered me too much, as I feel like the game had enough new ideas to stand on its own. Plus, even if you look at it like this, I feel like this game trims off so much of the unnecessary fat left in Dark Souls 1 that it's overall just a better experience. The overall world of Dark Souls 3 is more linear and doesn't have the same interconnectivity as Dark Souls 1, but I personally think the individual levels fared way better, and I found myself getting a lot less frustrated. It's also worth highlighting the weapons, which while this is something that the Souls series has never struggled with, I personally think this roster is particularly just badass and just feels really good to use. And that culminates in probably the biggest positive for this game: the bosses and their soundtrack. I'm not kidding when I say this might be my favorite boss roster of all time. Every one of them is both flashy and in-depth with the variety of moves that they can just whip you with. The orchestral soundtrack of these bosses just gives each battle an extra level of spectacle, as a lot of them could honestly pass for final bosses. It all culminates in a DLC that features not only my favorite boss fight of all time, but also one of the finest gaming moments I've ever experienced. Dark Souls 3, my third favorite game of the decade and my third favorite of all time. Number 2 is Super Mario Galaxy 2. Now we are hitting childhood territory. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is a game that I've spent countless hours in as a kid. This game is a freaking platformer, yet I've played through all these levels dozens of times as a kid, just because of how masterful and fun they were to play. Even revisiting the game, I not only realized I enjoyed it more than Odyssey, but I think this is the peak of Mario design. I know that's an easier thing to say for smaller series, but I seriously mean Mario in his 30-plus year legacy has never had more beautiful design in my opinion. It does take a lot from its predecessor, which I also highly adore, but I personally think it adds its own atmosphere and spin on things that it feels very fresh and just improves in about every area. Galaxy 2 does falter a bit in some of its post-game content and its underwhelming final battle, but the consistent quality of levels and missions across this game makes it one of the most comfortably fun game experiences I've ever had. I may be a bit nostalgia biased, but I don't really care. This game has so many great memories attached to it, and I will always love it. And my number 1 favorite game of the decade, also my favorite game of all time, is Hollow Knight. This was the first game I purchased on Steam after I got my new PC, and oh my god, I could not believe how great it was. Hollow Knight is a 2D Metroidvania platformer that takes a lot of inspirations from the Souls games. I never played any Souls games before playing Hollow Knight, so this was my first taste into this kind of difficulty in world building. It left quite the impression on me, as I found this game's challenge to be very tightly designed, and even looking back after playing the Souls games, I noticed that it doesn't take too much to where it feels like a ripoff, yet it understands the beats that make it work. Hollow Knight almost feels like it went down the checklist of everything I love in video games. The worlds are colorful, interconnected, and labyrinthian. The bosses are challenging yet very creative, and the characters are brimming with personality in contrast of this world full of grim tales. Hollow Knight is a game full of surprises and great ideas that I dare not spoil. I'd recommend this game to almost anybody who likes some good exploration and challenge. Maybe this game will capture you in the same way it did me. Well guys, before I wrap this video up, I'm just gonna leave with a little compilation of some runner-ups, as this decade had so many amazing games, I feel like it would be a crime not to mention some of them. Anyway, thank y'all for watching, hope you're having a great day, see you later.